Whew. All right, we should be back online now. Hopefully, everything is going to work this time, considering that the audio was not working out last time. So first, before we do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and play a few seconds of the video, and if it works, then we will know that everything's good.
But I want to talk for a minute about the secular case against homosexuality. We've already touched on a couple topics related to...
Okay, let me know if you guys heard that in the live chat. It should go through. Everything should be good. In an ideal world. Excellent. Excellent. We have audio now. Although apparently, my live feed is not telling me how many viewers I have now, which is more than a little disheartening, but that's fine. I can just go ahead and pull my live dashboard over here and get some information on that. Oh no, it just says 0 watching still. It also says science falsely so called, I think. Even though this is not science falsely so called. Oh boy. Me am good at YouTubing. Called, I think. No, it doesn't say that. Okay, cool. Excellent. Everything is actually working out. I only want to die a little. Just a little. Let's go ahead and pull that up there. All right. So, let me go ahead and go to his description one more time since we did that last time. I just know that if I don't do it, it's not going to be part of this video. Mike Winger's description down here, if you guys can read it, and I believe you should be able to. For those who are willing to think about the issue, even from a secular standpoint, we ought to see the dangers of homosexuality. It's not an issue of hatred or stoning gays. It's about how our support of dangerous behavior is going to harm society. Make a note of that. Homosexuality has become the sacred cow of the modern liberal politic. There's another set of people I've heard that have used this exact rhetoric, and they're called the NIFB. Guzman uses this. It's high time that we removed the emotional slandering that they so often engage in and dealt with the issue in a reasonable way. So, first of all, let me go ahead and throw out there, I don't have an issue with Mike Winger as a person, but I do think that his argument is flawed, and I made a case against that when I had my debate with him and Ocean on Non Sequitur Show yesterday. He thought that I had an issue with him personally, but I can separate, just me at least, I can separate the person from the belief, just like there's friends I have who are Christians who I know think that I'm going to be burning in hell. I think that's wrong, and I think that's horrid, but I can at least separate those two. And I can do so with Mike as well, at least to an extent. So, we will go ahead and get into his secular case against homosexuality and see what issues we have with it.
To it, but let's do this. Why do we want to do this? Well, you might be like, I don't need a secular case. I got the biblical case. Well, you're right. You don't need one for you, but you want to influence other people in good directions in their lives. And also, there is a secular case. There's a lot of reasons here.
So this is around about 5 seconds after the point that I paused last time. So the case I want to make here is that it's okay for a Christian, at least within their scope, to say that, oh, well, it's wrong to be homosexual if you're a Christian. If a Christian wants to make that case for themselves, go ahead. Corinthians supports you. Romans supports you. I don't support you. I think it's wrong trying to tell people what they can and can't be. As long as they're not harming anybody, I think that trying to make the case that we should be trying to police people's actions like that is incorrect, at least when it comes to this issue. So, but my problem here is not that he talks about the Christian worldview. My problem here is that he's trying to give tools to Christians so that they can tell people who are not Christians that they shouldn't be doing this. And not tools that are from the Bible, because obviously, if you're not a Christian, why should you care about what's in the Bible? I don't care what's in the Bible, because I'm not a Christian. But if somebody were to bring these to me, I would have to at least consider these. And there's nothing wrong with considering data points, but there is a problem when the reason you're doing it is to dial back to that Christian perspective. That's when I start to have problems. But with that, we will continue. Clade also says that it implies being homosexual is a choice. Not necessarily. I don't know if he makes that point here. If he does, then he's wrong. But there are people that I've seen make the point that being homosexual isn't a choice, but the choice to do an act as a homosexual is a choice, which I find even worse because it's basically saying in order to exist and do things correctly, you need to be working against your nature. That's like if it's the same issue I have with chastity. I'm not okay with chastity, trying to say that somebody has to be celibate. Why? I mean, what benefit does it give to force somebody to be celibate, except sexually repressing them and possibly damaging them as a person? I don't see a point to it. I don't see a benefit to it. And that's all that would happen here is if you said somebody's okay being homosexual, but you're not okay with their acts, which actually I think is a case Mike made during the debate, but I'm not going to address that unless he makes it here in the video.
And the info I'm about to share with you, it shows the great danger of homosexual activity for homosexuals.
The great danger of homosexual activity for homosexuals. Okay.
Great danger. You may have thought it was unhealthy, but you'll probably be surprised to find out how unhealthy it actually is. And also, because some believers who know the biblical case, they think it's wrong, but they're acting like it's okay. And for them to see that there's a biblical and secular case might help bring them over to saying, okay, take a stand. Take a stand out of love for the gay community.
So take a stand out of love for the gay community by telling them that what they're doing is wrong. No, that's not a case of love. That's not. That's like if an abuser, I'm not saying that Christians are abusers here, but it is an abusive tactic to try to limit what another human being can do if you don't have any authority over them. So this obviously doesn't work for parent to child. But to try to limit what another human being can do because you think that it's icky for reason A, B, C, X, or Y. It's not right to do so. And it doesn't come from a place of love. You think it comes from a place of love, and you might have the intention that it comes from a place of love, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Who is being pushed because of political agendas into doing self-destructive behaviors. So the secular case is going to ask these questions. What impact does homosexual behavior have on individuals in general, the ones who engage in the behavior, and the ones that they directly impact? And what impact does it have on society as a whole?
None. There is no impact on society. But continue.
So those are two different questions that I think are valid for a secular case regarding. Secular doesn't mean anti-biblical, it just means in addition to, other than. So we want to determine, should we encourage this behavior or not? I mean, the current issue is not just live and let live. That's been going on for a long time. This is about approving. I mean, society as courts and laws and this sort of thing, and even just public opinion, we could do one of four things. We can prohibit behavior like murder. You're not allowed to do that. That's prohibited. We can discourage behavior like smoking. There's extra taxes on it and things like this, and it's discouraged, and you can't do it in certain places at certain times. We could protect behavior. We not only allow it, but we actually protect it, like speech. Free speech. Speech is a protected thing we have. And we could even reward behavior like marriage or military service. Certain behaviors we actually reward as society. So we're kind of saying, where is homosexual behavior on this scale? Should it be prohibited, discouraged, protected, rewarded, or
I would say that it needs to be protected until it becomes normalized. And once it becomes normalized, then it should be just considered the norm. That would be my case. I think that there's a certain level of egalitarianism that needs to be employed when we're talking about issues like this, and until a marginalized group has been brought back to the same standards of equality that everybody else is there's a certain level of egalitarianism that needs to be exercised to get them up to speed. So, for instance, there's not really a case that is made for protecting heterosexual marriage. But we do have cases that are made for protecting gay marriage as a right, because that is a thing that classically has not been protected, and at least in the United States, has only recently been protected. We are very behind as a society, here at least. So, and I think emotionally mimetic psychopath says, since when did marriage become a reward? I agree. It's not necessarily a reward. It should just be a right if you are the type of person that wants to get married.
Just, laissez-faire, just kind of allowed. At the very least, what I'm about to share with you says this: it should not be rewarded. It certainly shouldn't be rewarded and encouraged to increase.
There's a difference there. Encouraging behavior is, again, it's a part of egalitarianism. If this is a marginalized group that have not been able to express themselves, then the behavior does need to be encouraged, not because it's behavior that should be encouraged and everybody should do it, but because it is behavior that has been marginalized. You encourage it so as to normalize it. This is the same reason that you've got people trying to encourage people to adopt the label of atheist if they happen to fall into that religious non-category, because you are trying to make people understand that these people exist, they have their rights, and they should be okay, and people should be okay with them, and people who are not okay with them can fuck right off. Alan says, gay here against gay marriage. How about the government? Get the government out of the business of saying who and who cannot be married. That is a fair point. I don't think that the government should really be involved in who you have a relationship with. This is coming from somebody who's polyamorous, so obviously I'm not protected under this, but that's fine. If people want marriage, if they want the rights that come with it, then I think that they should be allowed to pursue those rights.
In short, homosexual behavior is bad for individuals and society because, well, for one, it's related to various physical afflictions.
Physical afflictions. Let's get into that.
Which you're not going to get argument on either side on this issue. There are, obviously, we know about AIDS. I'll come back to that in a minute, HIV and AIDS.
3 minutes. It took 3 minutes. 3 minutes for us to get to AIDS. 3. Okay. Mike, if you wanted to know why I came into our conversation seeming like I might have had an axe to grind, this is why. I'm sure you're going to make a case. And the last time I watched the video, if memory serves, you made the case. My memory's horrible, though. So every time that I watch a video, it's usually like I'm watching it for the first time.
But there are problems with homosexual behavior that are not related to HIV and AIDS. And it has to do with the particulars of human, I hate to be crude, but because of the plumbing of human beings. Your body's not designed for this, so I'll put it that way.
So the plumbing of human beings. Okay, so he's talking about anal sex, because that's the only thing that it could really be referring to. So this does not count lesbians, and this does not count homosexuals that have sex outside of anal. There are homosexual couples who do not enjoy anal. That might sound vulgar to some people, but there are homosexual couples who prefer doing other things, who are exclusively oral or have other things. You can be very creative with sex. Anal is not the only option.
That way, there's great details here, but your body's not designed for this. So 1/3 of men who engage in regular homosexual receptive behavior have chronic incontinence or failures of the sphincter muscle because it's been damaged by the behavior. Chronic incontinence.
Okay, and while that might be a fair point, and I'm willing to grant that point, that might be something that happens. However, this means that you also have to include heterosexual couples who engage in anal behavior or any type of play in that realm. You are now having to actively include these people in your problems. You are now going to say, oh, well, it's not just gay people that we have a problem with, it's also anybody who has anal. But that's not the argument that you make here. The argument that you're making here is against homosexuality. And you're trying to bring nuance into it while also ignoring literally all of the nuance.
Diarrhea, cramps, hemorrhoids, prostate damage, ulcers, and fissures, which invite infections, are all too common amongst those who engage in same-sex behaviors.
Again, that does not include lesbians. That literally doesn't include that group. That does not include anybody who doesn't engage in anal. And you have to now include heterosexual couples who engage in anal. So you've written yourself into a really awkward corner here.
In 75% of syphilis cases in 2012, they were amongst men who practiced sex with other men.
And you're going to find this a lot of times. I did a video on Steven Anderson talking about these issues and talking about some of the studies that you cite, because Mike gets into CDC studies here in a little bit. And one of the reasons that this happens, there's two main reasons this happens. One, the anal cavity is a faster link to the bloodstream than the vaginal wall is. The anal cavity, as a result, means that if one person has syphilis, it's easier for the other person to get syphilis. However, this means that the first person has to have syphilis first. This also comes into play when you're talking about AIDS and anything else like that. Technically, there's three reasons that this happens, but the other two have to do with sexual education. The second issue and the reason this happens is because when you're dealing with anal sex, typically condoms are not used anywhere near as often because our sexual education system here in America, where most of these studies are conducted, teaches that condoms are a great way to prevent pregnancy, but they don't talk that much about STDs. And that's if they talk about it at all, because a lot of times our sexual education system is abstinence-only based. I have a video on my channel about that as well. So, no. You have a problem where condoms are not being used as often as they should, which means that if person A has syphilis and gives it to person B because there's a proclivity to gaining it through the anal cavity, then you're going to have a problem. And the reason that this happens is because of problem 3. The lack of sexual education has led to another problem. There's already an ostracization of gay people in America. There's a ton of stigmas against them. So the idea of going to get themselves checked for something, there is a lot of anxiety behind that. There's a lot of anxiety that leads people to not do so. There's several testimonials of people who have not gone to get themselves checked for something because there's a stigma attached to it. In fact, we have commercials talking about AIDS that strictly only have gay men talking about AIDS. This is something that happened in the 90s when I was growing up. These advertisements link those STDs with people who are gay. That creates a stigma. Those people do not want to go where they're going to be stigmatized. So when you create this environment where they're stigmatized, they don't get themselves checked to see whether or not they've come into contact with one of these diseases. That's your problem 1. Your problem 2 is the sexual education hasn't taught them that condoms are going to be more useful in dealing with these diseases. And then that leads you to the final issue. Hello, how are you doing today? And that finally leads you to the issue where it is more often that sexual diseases reproduce through the anal cavity because these diseases spread through liquids and the bloodstream. This is why there's a high proclivity for HIV and AIDS whenever you're dealing with somebody who's on, I think meth is a good example for this. That happens a lot in communities that do drugs like that because they don't have access to sterile needles. There's a lot of sharing of needles, which means there's a lot of passing of blood between different people. And when that passing of blood happens, you end up with the exact same issue here. Also, the cat's name is Terror. But, that said, we're 3 minutes into the video, we still have more to get to.
In 2012, according to the Center for Disease Control.
I've seen the CDC.
Keep in mind that this percentage of men the 75% represents about 2% of the population's behavior. So the chances of syphilis are astronomically high amongst men who practice sex with men. The most common disease is something called amoebiasis, and 25 to 40% of homosexual men are affected by that disease. The list goes on, and for sake of time, I'm going to move quickly here, but gonorrhea, chlamydia, various viral infections like anal warts, herpes, hepatitis B, hepatitis A. Men who have sex...
I'd like to go ahead and throw out there as a bit of normalization. The kitty is Terror. This is Terror. Terror is a good kitty. I'd like to go ahead and throw out there that most people actually already carry a type of herpes. If you get cold sores in your mouth, then you have a type of oral herpes. Sorry, we call it cold sores because that's the normalization of that. But unfortunately, that's the reality that you live in. And congratulations, welcome to 2019. But every single example that you cited, without the little bit of fun information that I threw in there, falls into the category of issues 2 and 3. Lack of use of condom, or actually no, it falls into all of them. Lack of testing, lack of use of condoms, and the proclivity of the anal cavity.
with men have a typical STD rate that over a course of their lives, 75% of them will have STDs. Over the course of a year, 40% of them will have STDs. The general population has a lifetime STD rate of 16.9%, and that includes in there the homosexual group, and a yearly STD rate of 1.6%. Of course, not for anyone, pretty much, who stays a virgin until they're married, like the scripture declares.
Like the scripture declares. If this is supposed to be a secular case against homosexuality, then you ought not bring the scripture into it, because that has nothing to do with it. Also, your entire thought process, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there, the entire thought process about being a virgin before you get married is, to borrow a term you used, astronomically stupid. And I could make thousands of cases for this and why that is the case. I would also like my kitty back. Please. Thank you. She is fluff. Thanks, my love. Anyway, I'm going to continue the video.
You know what? She knows you like Baba more. It's okay. She's just upset because you like her sister more. Story of my life.
And John Pascal says that the issue is that more often than not, I see people like this ignoring the statistics towards hetero couples or omit them to further their cause. I agree that that's an issue as well. It does seem, though, that he's included some of the statistics for hetero couples here, so I'm at least going to grant Mike that he did include some of that here, which is good. I'm happy that he did. Unfortunately, his case is undermined by literally everything else in society. What you would expect to find... and I'm fairly certain, I'm going to make a prediction that in the next 35 years, because that's enough time for us to both get some more analysis on this and a metadata analysis, I'm going to make a prediction that all of those numbers are going to slowly go down to more normalized values. Maybe not completely, because I live in the South and I have no faith for this place, but I do think those numbers are going to go down, because as... these things get normalized, as the stigma behind STDs gets lifted so that people can actually talk about them. That's another issue. People sometimes don't want to communicate that they have these things because there is a stigma. It's not just a stigma that prevents them from going to get tested, but it's a stigma that prevents them from having communication with their partners. For instance, imagine, and this is not a good thing, mind you, if you have an STD, you need to communicate this with your partner. No ifs, ands, or buts. But imagine you were in a situation where it's incredibly hard for you to actually get somebody to be in a relationship with you. Mainly because, let's say, like me, you live here in the South, and there's a huge anti-homosexual front here. There's a lot of homophobes. So you do finally get somebody that you're interested in, and you get to the point where you guys are going to do something. You are now faced with the problem. If you know you have an STD, there's a stigma attached to you having it. Do you know if your partner's still going to accept you if you let them know that this is the thing that happens? Or, worst case scenario, this one is at least more honest, but still bad. Both people end up being drunk, and they end up having sex, and then this STD goes forward anyway because they don't use a condom, and their inhibitions are completely gone, and the idea of bringing up the conversation is gone because alcohol. There's a ton of nuance in this situation that can lead to the statistics that we see here. But those are being ignored because I think that there's definitely an agenda here.
You don't have to worry if that's you. You don't have to get tested or anything.
Yes, the fuck you do! No, if you think that you don't have to get tested simply because you're a virgin, then you're wrong. Because all that matters is that something gets into your blood. If I were to bring out a typically egregious example, not egregious, but kind of a gross example, let's say that you find yourself in a situation where you're having to use a public toilet, and you have a scratch on your backside for any number of reasons. The liquid, let's say that you don't clean off the seat that you're on, and the person that was there before you had one of these diseases that are transferable through bodily liquids. There is a chance, however small, that you're going to contract this disease anyway because of this situation. It is a small chance. It is minute. But a minute chance is still enough to get tested for. And emotionally empathetic psychopath brings up another issue. If you have a blood transfusion, it is also good to get tested. You need to make sure that you are safe. Anytime there is a transference of liquid of any kind, you need to make sure that you are safe. It doesn't just boil down to, oh, you're a virgin, you're safe. That's not how this works. And if Mike honestly read these studies and didn't just try to pull numbers to further his agenda, then he would have seen this.
Because you're good to go. You're good to go. But I would say that every one of these STDs, with almost no exceptions, is going to have come from people doing what the Bible calls sin. Various cancers is not just STDs. Cancers such as colon cancer and even breast cancer are higher in the gay community.
And I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say that he's not going to give the reasons behind why that is.
Don't ask me why breast cancer is higher amongst lesbians, but it is.
This is live, folks. I didn't plan that. I didn't plan that. That thing that just happened there was not planned. Whew. Okay. Anyway.
Statistically, it is. And that is acknowledged on pro-gay websites. They're like, hey, women, you need to get this checked out and that checked out because your instances are higher of these different cancers. In men who have sex with men who do not have HIV, they are 20 times more likely to get anal cancer.
Okay, so at least you're not taking the approach that you have a spontaneous generation of HIV. That's at least good. But you're saying that, oh, well, if they don't have it, which undermines an earlier point. What are you doing?
I was seeing if you had a pen.
I do not have a pen. But if you find yourself in a situation like this, you're undermining your previous point. Because your previous point, you ignored the fact that one of the people has to already have this disease, which means that if one of them's heterosexual, they're going to give it to their partner anyway. You ignored that in your previous argument, but you bring it up here. It's a double-edged sword that cuts backwards onto your own position. I would like to address the lesbian breast cancer thing, but I know that he's not going to. If I had remembered that this was one of the points that he brought up, then I would have... Tim, he actually does have citations. If you go to his website, he has notes for this particular... Not this particular video, but he has a 5-part series on homosexuality. And he's got a 48-page set of notes there where his citations are for these things. Luckily, with some of them, he says what they are, like the CDC study, which Stephen Anderson uses. And I have checked into those because he said what his sources were. And I do remember, though, that there was a breast cancer study that was completely debunked. I remember a friend of mine, Brian, did a thing on that at one point. I would like to address that one further, but I don't have the information to address it as of right now. If I do gain the information and it comes up at a later point, then there will be a video made dedicated to that so that I can point out the issue with this.
20 times. In men who have sex with men who are HIV positive, they are 40 times more likely to get anal cancer. The list goes on of cancers and things like this. It goes on and on and on, and it's very unpleasant stuff because your heart hurts for people suffering these things.
Oh, that's what we're going to do. We're going to turn this into... This is going to turn into one of those arguments from love, which is what it was earlier. Sorry, though, if you're going to tell people who they can and can't have sex with, as long as all parties are consenting, obviously, that's the big takeaway there. Sorry, that's not coming from a place of love.
Amongst those who do have AIDS, well, in the current population, 1.2 million people in the U.S. currently have HIV. 1.2 million people, the majority of which got it through male-to-male sexual behaviors. The HIV, the virus seems to have an affinity for the specific flesh of the rectum. It's without any more details than that. That is
because there's a direct pathway to the bloodstream there. It's the same reason that you get drunk off alcohol faster when you are taking it through the anus. It's not that the virus has a proclivity for the ass. It's that the ass is a pathway to the bloodstream. That means everything has a proclivity for it. I cannot do it right now.
I'm putting it here so you will be reminded, my love.
Okay.
Ooh. Goodbye.
that is its happy place to be, and it's extreme.
The ass is the happy place for AIDS. That's a sound clip you can take from me. Don't do that. You're probably going to do it anyway.
Extremely dangerous for men. There are 50,000 new HIV infections every year in the United States. We don't talk about it very much anymore. Not since probably the 90s. We sort of stopped talking about it.
Do you know why that is, Mike? That's because our medications for people with HIV have actually improved in the last few years. It stopped being as much of a problem. It's still a problem. It's still a huge issue, and it is something that needs to be taken care of. It's something that I wish we had a cure for. But the fact is, the medication for it has improved so much that it's become less of an issue as it was in the 90s.
But there are 50,000 new HIV infections every year, and CDC.gov says that 78% of all new HIV infections are a result of men having sex with men. 78% of these 50,000 infections are men having sex with men, but you've got to keep something in mind. This is really shocking when you realize those who have sex with men on a regular basis is less than 2% in a given year.
That's a point you made earlier, the fact that they make up 2% of the population. But that point also doesn't matter, because I've already given you your 3 reasons why it doesn't matter. You have heterosexual couples who engage in anal sex as well, but not quite as much, because, again, argument from ick. There's people who think that it's icky, so, they don't do it. And they don't have as much need to. But you also have the issue of education. You have the issue of lack of protection. You have the issue of the way things work down there. But again, it doesn't matter. I don't care about the smug-ass look you have on your face. It doesn't matter that those people have those issues. Because again, one of the people has to have. They already have to be in a situation where they can give the HIV virus. Or whichever STD you want them to have for your argument.
Of the population. Less than 2% of the population getting 78% of the HIV infections. What are the odds there? How many times more likely is it? I'm not a mathematician, so I haven't figured it out. I asked a mathematician, but it's complicated. I'm sure it is. Yeah. Those stats come from the CDC.gov. They're not from pro-family websites that are trying to twist things. This is just related to not only diseases and those sorts of things, but drug and substance abuse are also radically increased amongst the homosexual community for some reason.
I can give you a reason why that is, Mike, if you'd like one. If you're part of an ostracized community and you're not allowed to talk with your peers about it because you are ostracized for being part of that community, typically we see a higher percentage of those people turning to other means, turning to other ostracized communities like the drug community. You're going to find that people who are told that they cannot be themselves are going to find ways to cope. They're going to cope with drugs. They're going to cope with alcohol. Sometimes they're going to cope in healthy ways. A lot of times they are not going to cope in healthy ways. What you are doing right here is directly contributing to the problem you're trying to fight against. Do you not see a problem here?
Those who self-identify as homosexuals were found to have used tobacco in the past 30 days at a rate double the non-homosexual community.
Again, coping mechanisms.
18% of heterosexuals have used tobacco in the past 30 days, whereas 35% of homosexuals.
Okay. There's this lovely thing we have in statistics called correlation does not mean causation. Just because you have correlative numbers doesn't mean that it's a cause. Now, granted, in the case of the coping mechanism, person is homosexual, society ostracizes them, coping mechanism required. There's a causal link there. But understand that if you removed this part of the chain, the societal ostracization, you would no longer have a link there. The link would be broken. It'd be gone. That causal link only exists when people like you do what you are doing here. That's the only way that link exists.
Alcohol abuse has also increased, especially in the lesbian community. 35% of female homosexual women had a history of alcohol abuse, compared to 5% of females in general. So they're 7 times more likely to have alcohol abuse. Other similar statistics come from pro-gay sources that are saying the same thing because they're trying to help these gay people, like, hey, watch out, you've got this tendency, we have these statistics, and we want you to be careful, which is good.
And then people like you come in and use it as a method for undermining them as people.
45% of the LGBT population, according to the Pride Institute, abuse alcohol. 45%.
And do you know what jobs have the higher rate of alcohol consumption? By the way, I love the smug look on his face, like, I just made a good point. Sorry, not trying to undermine his position just based on where I happen to pause the video. Should we prevent people from getting into jobs that force them to consume a higher amount of alcohol to cope with things simply because of that? Because if that's the case, then that means that just like with your first point, where we had to undermine your position based on the fact that heterosexuals can have sex as well through the ass. Sorry, Mike, this doesn't help your point.
Versus about 15% of the general population. It's not just alcohol and tobacco. 51% of homosexual males have a history of drug abuse, other drugs.
Coping mechanism.
Compared to 7% in general. Men who have sex with men are 3.5 times more likely to use pot, marijuana, than men who do not have sex with men.
Coping mechanism.
These men are also 12.2 times more likely to use amphetamines than men who do not have sex with men.
So, what was the point that I brought up earlier about meth? How when you're in these societies and you find yourself in a situation where you are using drugs and you don't have access to clean needles, that is typically a way that you will gain these types of blood-transmitted diseases. And now that you have gotten these blood-transmitted diseases because you shared a needle, now you are inevitably going to give this to your partner. You might not even know it. You might be on meth because it's the only thing that helps you cope with the fact that this is a situation that you're in. A situation that you were put in by the society that you live in. Granted, your method of coping with it was not the right method. I'm not going to say that it is. If you are going down the road of taking hard drugs because that's what you need to make yourself cope, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life, but I am going to tell you that it's not healthy. However, if you are pushed down that road because society pushed you down that road, then understand again, you've got this link here and the link over here, and you need society to link those two things together. If you remove that ostracization, you're going to see those numbers go down. What you're doing right here increases that.
They are 9.5 times more likely to use heroin.
Heroin. I love how he says it like part of the satanic panic.
Than men who don't have sex with men. There are also increases in the homosexual community in other areas like depression, suicidal thoughts, and attempted suicide. And these things they all seem to go together, substance abuse and this sort of stuff.
Yes, they go together because coping mechanisms. I'm not going to say it over and over again, but I'm willing to say it every time you bring up a point that needs to be pointed out.
For the sake of time, I need to move forward. But related to reckless sexual behavior, the number of partners and the brevity of relationships in the homosexual community is radically different than that of the heterosexual community. A study of sexual profiles of 2,583 older homosexuals was published in the Journal of Sex Research, and the most common response given by 21.6 of the respondents was of having 101 to 500 sex partners over their lifetime.
So, if you have 101 sex partners in your lifetime and you live to the age of 80, then you've probably had 2 sex partners a year past the point where you were 18. If we just count 18 to 80, you've had, on average, 2 sex partners a year. Who the fuck cares? Let's say that number 500. Let's take your non-conservative estimate, and let's take 18 to 80 again. Now we've just multiplied that. You've had 6 to 8 sex partners in a year. That means that you might have had, let's say in a given year, you had 1 orgy. That's the only sexual encounter you had that entire year. That filled your quota for 8 sex partners for that year, probably, assuming it was a large enough orgy. Congratulations. You have now said that this person has had sex with a whole bunch of people, which is true, they have. Sex parties can be fun, though. Anyway, point being, the amount of partners that somebody has, as long as they're being safe, doesn't matter. It's their bed, not yours.
That was the most common response given. 101 to 500 sex partners over the course of their lifetime. Only 2.7% of these men claimed to have only ever had sex with one partner. That's radically different than the heterosexual community.
Okay, and honestly, I will say that if somebody only has sex with one partner, as an adult, I'm not going to tell you that you should go and try to find somebody else to have sex with. If you're completely happy with the partner that you have, then more power to you. Awesome. But not everybody has to live by that standard. There are people who are polyamorous who would like to have more than one partner. And a lot of times, polyamorous people have less sex than heterosexual people, strangely. There are people who are part of the classically was called the leather community, but the BDSM community. These people would have multiple sex partners because it was a way of expressing themselves. It was actually a part of the fiber of their being. It wasn't just a thing that they did sometimes for the sake of procreation. It was actively a part of their identity. Somebody identified as a dom or somebody identified as a sub. They would naturally have more sex partners because sex was a more important part of their identity. So now we find ourselves in this awkward situation where your point literally has to strip these people of a portion of their identity in order to work. No. You do not strip people of their identity. I'm not going to strip you of your Christianity. You can be Christian all you want. And I'm not going to say that you're doing anything wrong until you are saying something against another community. But here we find ourselves in a situation where you are, and thus here I am.
It's not just that study, nor is that the worst statistics. Another study found that homosexual men had averaged over 20 partners per year. That was from LA in the late 1980s. And perhaps some of this has been curbed through attempts to change their sexual habits of the community because of safety issues. But another 3-year-long study in Boston in the late 80s found that 77% of the homosexuals surveyed had more than 10 partners in the previous 5 years.
So, again, who cares? These people have more partners. As long as they're being safe and they're properly educated on how to be safe during sex, then they're going to be fine. It doesn't matter that they did these things. If everybody knows what they're doing, take it from me. And I'm not saying to take this on faith. You can look this up if you'd like. There's a concept in the polyamorous community about getting yourself tested before you go and do what's called fluid bonding with any partner, or really just getting yourself tested in general. People in the polyamorous community, before they get with another partner, they will have the other partner and themselves both get tested. This happens a lot. And they will not date until they get tested. The idea of being very aware of what diseases you may or may not have is a huge deal in the poly community. It's not as much a huge deal in the LGBTQ community because I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that it's not quite as tight-knit because it is larger in scope. Poly communities generally end up being a lot more tight-knit. So, you need to find better ways to educate people on sex, on STDs, how and where to get themselves tested, and how to do it cheaply, especially when you find yourself in a situation where you're going to have multiple sex partners over a short period of time. That means you have to get tested more.
More than 10. 34% of them had more than 50 partners in that same amount of time. Several other studies have agreed, and some have given even more shocking numbers, probably depending on the demographics of the area they were at.
More shocking. I love the language that's being used here. The numbers have to be shocking. The numbers have to be bad. Everything has to be some type of language that incentivizes action.
The worst ones have been the ones taken from San Francisco area. But I didn't quote those to you because I'm not trying to give you the most shocking. I'm actually giving you the more conservative numbers.
But by talking about the other numbers and saying that, oh, there are more shocking numbers out there I could have used, you invariably teach your audience that there are those more shocking numbers. And instead of giving those numbers, by letting your audience think about what those numbers could be, you might be working against what you're saying. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing. I'm not saying that you're trying to be dishonest. But I hope you can see how it can seem like you're being dishonest there.
Among heterosexuals, a study found that only 17% of men and 10% of women had more than one partner in the previous year. More than one. Only 17% of men and 10% of women. Just by comparison. So you don't think, well, everyone's doing that stuff. Well, it's radically different. So the number of partners and the brevity of relationships show a reckless sexual behavior happening inside the homosexual community, and that's a typical thing. Now, it's not every person, but it seems to be the theme. Same-sex long-term relationships are also, they're not a parallel to heterosexual marriage, because even in long-term committed same-sex relationships, they are almost never monogamous.
So? Also, I feel like this is a point that you would have brought up in our live discussion on Non Sequitur Show. Because on Non Sequitur Show, I brought up an example of a heterosexual couple that could not have children, let's say that they were infertile, and a homosexual couple that opted out of having children, let's say that they decided not to go for surrogacy, or they decided not to go for artificial insemination. So we have ourselves a situation where both couples cannot have children. What is different about these couples? Oh, well, the other couple has a higher chance of not being monogamous. Okay, well, I said couples. I only talked about the two individuals. I'm talking about their two separate relationships. Also, is it not strange to you that when you ostracize a society of people and you marginalize a group of people, that they would have more fringe behaviors and not ascribe to your nuclear family model? Because the nuclear family model is the Puritan Christian ideal model for American families. But heterosexual couples don't necessarily, or homosexual couples don't necessarily need that nuclear model. I mean, heterosexual couples don't need it either. But you don't need that nuclear model in your homosexual marriages or your homosexual relationships, because they're already put to the fringe. Of course they're going to have more fringe behaviors. Whether or not you approve of them doesn't matter.
They are almost never faithful to only one partner. The frequency of sex outside of the long-term relationship is very common. In one recent
It is very common. Okay, well, first of all, you're using terms like faithful. And if you might allow me to give you a juxtaposition to compare this to. In a polyamorous relationship, the idea of being faithful is very different than the idea of being faithful in a heterosexual, cis-normative relationship, where it's purely monogamous. See, in a monogamous relationship, faith to your partner can mean many things. It can mean not talking to a member of the opposite sex. It can mean not having sex with a member of the opposite sex, not kissing, not hugging, not doing anything. And that's fair. But for polyamorous people, this is maybe a little different. Because here, things like hugging and sometimes kissing are not necessarily riled against as much if there is an open thoroughfare of communication. Faith in a monogamous relationship means never doing anything outside of your relationship, classically. In a polyamorous relationship, it means communicating with your partner. If, let's say that Pam wanted to get a girlfriend tomorrow, as long as we had a conversation about it, I would be okay with that. That's what she wants to do, cool. Same goes for boyfriend. She wants to grab somebody else. If that's what she wants to do, we can have a conversation, we can meet the person. They get tested for STDs and they end up being okay. Awesome. You two are now dating. That's how it works. That is still faithful. That is still being faithful. Because even though you're doing something with somebody else, you are communicating that with your partner, and if your partner agrees to it, awesome. Obviously, there's a certain level of manipulation that can be had there as well. There's some partners that use power play in order to do shit that's not really great and it's underhanded. There's an entire issue with... I'm not going to get into this issue right now, but if you're in the poly community, then you understand the term unicorn hunter as a pejorative. Not exactly the great thing. But we will continue in here. And if anybody wants me to talk about what a unicorn hunter is, then let me know in the chat. But till then, we will continue with Mike Winger's video.
Recent study of gay male couples, 41.3% of them, of the couples, had open sexual agreements with some conditions or restrictions. 41% agreed with some conditions we will be able to have sex outside of our relationship with other people.
Yeah, it's called polyamory.
10% had open sexual agreements with no restrictions on sex with outside partners. 1/5 of the participants reported breaking their agreement in the preceding 12 months for those who agreed not to.
Okay, and cheating happens in heterosexual relationships as well. But I do see that Hanako wants me to talk about what a unicorn hunter is. And emotionally mimetic psychopath says unicorn hunter sounds like somebody interested in furries. So a unicorn hunter, there's a type of relationship in polyamory called a triangle. This is different than what is known as a V. In a triangle relationship, all parties are dating each other. Unicorn hunters are typically a group of a male and a female. We're talking about sex right now. The gender issue is separate from this. We're talking about a normal cisnormative male, cisnormative female. They are together, and they are looking for a female for them both to date, which means that this female needs to like both of their personalities. The reason that they're called unicorn hunters is because unicorns are rare mythical magical creatures that don't exist. There are very few situations where a female is okay with dating both the male and the female in this situation, and also in this situation is okay with exclusively being with them. That's the other thing. When you're looking for a unicorn, you're looking for this to be what's called a closed triangle, where this does not branch out into any more. That the unicorn that you found is dating the two of you, and that's it. Lady Unicorn says, "How dare you, Suris?" Double A has a super chat, says, is he comparing 30-year-old data on LGBTQ community with more recent data on hetero community? I'm not certain. That might be the case, but I don't know. But typically, unicorn hunters are looked down on in the polyamorous community because they are actively looking for something that is rare and something that is very restrictive, when poly communities are generally about being a little more free. That is says, you missed a $5 super chat comment I made above. Oh, I am sorry about that. That you should shout down the fundy bigot arguments on this subject. Where is that super chat? I am scrolling up to find it. I think I just found it. Gotcha. Sorry, Event Horizon. So when fundy bigots get every form of cancer, Parkinson's, and every other kind of disease, how do they explain it? Well, yeah, understandable. So there you go. That is the explanation of what a unicorn is for the polyamorous community. And it's usually not unicorns that are looked down on, although there are some people that use the idea that they might be somebody's unicorn as a position of power manipulation. That's an issue that happens sometimes. Usually it's the unicorn hunters that are looked down on.
This is something that even pro-gay theologians would have to call sexually immoral.
No, they wouldn't have to. If they would have to, they would have to accept that Abraham was sexually immoral. But they're not going to say that. They're going to say that, oh, that was a different time. While at the same time would probably have an issue with Islam and Aisha. But that's a separate issue.
The sad truth is that the vast majority of same-sex relationships, which last longer than 5 years, almost in every case, involve an agreement to have sex outside the relationship in order to satiate those desires. And that ends up being a keystone for keeping them together.
Okay. So gay couples found a way to be happy. There's only one thing I can say to that. Neat.
Is that we are able to express our sexuality with various people in different times. This is not a parallel to marriage.
It is a parallel to marriage, because in marriage you can have this too. Or, again, do I need to bring up the polyamorous community? I have poly friends who are married.
In various gay studies, they talk, or gay websites, they say this is a key. Hey guys, sometimes here's our advice to you. Make an agreement, talk about it, go ahead and give permission, and that way you can stay together. So that it's not marriage. That's not marriage. That's just cohabitating while sleeping around.
First of all, sleeping around is a pejorative, so thank you for that. I know that you're not meaning this to be insulting, but you have to understand that when you use language like that, you inevitably will be insulting. Also, Catholic Fusionist said there that Abraham was sexually immoral. You know what? Honesty is nice. Also, hi Max, how's it going? Catholic Fusionist is actually one of my friends. I like the guy.
A third difference, or a third issue here, a reason why we don't want to encourage and endorse homosexual behavior. Encouraging it will increase it, and it will increase the afflictions associated with it. I mean, if this is this drastic, if I'm losing years off of my life because of homosexual behavior, then I should at least not encourage it. I mean, what if the government went out there and posted ads encouraging people to start smoking cigarettes?
So you are comparing homosexuality and homosexual behavior with smoking cigarettes. So you're comparing something that somebody is not able to control, just themselves, their identity. You're conflating that with an agent that causes cancer. Okay. Also, AD try, I don't want to pronounce the last part because I know I'm going to get it wrong. Henanindrio, I think, is how you pronounce that. His links to his cited studies, I should be able to grab the link to his website, but it's called the Bible Thinker, BibleThinker.com, I believe. He has an area in there where he talks about homosexuality on the website itself, and he has links to 48 pages of his notes that he used for this and other talks on this here. So his citations are available.
And then anyone who came against them smoking cigarettes, they said, you're a bigot and a cigarettophobe, and it's irrational. If we're for the safety, health-wise of society, for secular reasons alone, we don't want to encourage this behavior. And you might say that's not fair. Well, in a sense, you're right. It's not fair. It's not fair to limit pilots to only people who have good vision.
That's not the same. You can't compare those two. You limit pilots to people who have good vision as a matter of personal safety. Hello. How are you? You seem to be very cuddly. The reason we limit pilots to people who have good vision is because it's a matter of personal safety. The reason that we don't advertise, the reason that we don't have government advertisements, as far as I'm aware of, for cigarettes is a matter of personal safety. Homosexuality is not a matter of personal safety.
It's not fair to say a brother and sister can't marry, but it's safe and healthy to say these things. That's what society does. We decrease.
And now you're comparing it to incest. Now, this is something that actually happened during our discussion on Non Sequitur show. I mentioned that he shouldn't bring up things like pedophilia and incest, and yet they were brought up in the discussion later as comparative points. And I pointed out how that's not something that you should do because they're not comparable. Again, the issue when you deal with situations like this, if you have two homosexual people who they want to be in a relationship, they are consenting adults. But if you're dealing with something like incest, or, especially if you're dealing with incest from like father down, mother down, something like that, you're going to have an issue of a power dynamic. And when you can't gauge the power dynamic between the couples, then it's hard to gauge where consent actually lies. How much consent then can there actually be when you think that you have to do something because you're dealing with an authority figure? Therein lies the issue. This is one of the same reasons that we have issue when teachers have sex with students, even if the students are of age. You still have an issue of a power dynamic that can be manipulated. There's a reason that we hold umbrage with these. This is ignoring the fact that when we're talking about an issue of incest, again, this is not comparable, because when we're talking about incest, at least if we're talking about heterosexual incest, we have the capacity for birth. And we know that over a certain period of generations, if you have incestuous relationships over a certain period of generations, your proclivity for non-beneficial mutations goes up. And it becomes very, very destructive to the offspring. So, no. These are not comparable, because homosexual relationships, by definition, can't beget offspring.
The fairness or the freedom in order for safety and healthiness to be happening. And so we do this in some cases. It's not fair to tell me I can't drive on the other side of the road, but it's safe and healthy to tell me I can't drive on the other side of the road. Another reason for this, our secular case, same-sex erotic relationships are inferior to heterosexual relationships in several capacities. One, the most obvious, they cannot produce children. Society has a vested interest in marriage and in same-sex opposite-sex relationships.
Freudian slip.
Because these produce kids. You're all a result of these kinds of relationships.
Not necessarily. You might not be a result of a marriage-type relationship. You say that you all are a result of marriage-type relationships. But if you are the result of, daddy deciding to do a little dump, one night out of the week, randomly at the bar, sorry, you're not a result of that type of relationship.
Must have these relationships for society to continue. We need children. Society must be invested in children, or else it will fall. And so that's an inferiority in same-sex relationships. A same-sex relationship can't produce children any more than a relationship between a cow and a cloud can produce a child. It's complete.
That's a complete non sequitur, though. Saying a relationship between a cow and a cloud. First of all, you have an inanimate object that's temporal at best, because the cloud only exists as long as it contains water. As soon as it doesn't contain water, cloud's gone. It's not the same thing, especially when you're talking about animal to an inanimate object. The fact that they can't produce does not make it anywhere close to the same thing as a homosexual relationship. Not to mention, as has been stated many times, if you happen to have a heterosexual couple who are infertile, do these people now have lesser rights because they are infertile? Because they will have the same chance of creating offspring as the homosexual couple do. Big zero.
Completely impossible. There's only one way for this to happen. Also, it's inferior in raising children. And this is new information that we didn't have several years back, but let me read you some information.
They are inferior at raising children. So that was just a wide sweeping generalization for all homosexual and lesbian parents. Okay. I'm going to try not to be... I'm hetero, and I'm trying my best not to be insulted, but I'm failing.
Children who are raised in a same-sex marriage or by a same-sex parent, they were analyzed in a...
You have to if you listen to his thing, maybe, but I don't know if that even comes into play.
Because bisexuals are the mixture of hetero and, homo. Because they still like their same gender, and they still like...
sex,
and then the opposite sex.
Mm-hmm.
So...
I think he would categorize, if somebody's bisexual and they're in a hetero relationship, he would categorize them as hetero. And if they
But
were
they're
in,
still gay.
well,
They're still gay.
they're still
so-
bi.
And I would agree. What about pansexuals? That puts
Yeah,
them
what
in the same category.
Yeah, what about
Like-
somebody? What about somebody who's bi? What about somebody who's pan? There's what's happening here is he's trying to bring in nuance by citing all these statistics, but he's ignoring literally all the nuance, all of it.
Study by a guy named Mark Regnerus from the University of Texas, Austin.
Fun fact: Mark Regnerus actually received a $700,000 fine for his study, by the way, because it was funded by an organization that had an agenda that was anti-LGBTQ. And after finding out that they had that agenda and that he willingly participated in this study, he was fined as a result, and the study was considered completely discredited.
And his study was published in Social Science Research. Try saying that 5 times fast. And the quotes that follow, I'll give you some information now about that. It is the best and most thorough study to date, and it compared kids. It's the first one to really do this. Compare kids raised by 2 married biological parents versus kids raised by a gay parent or gay parents. So they had lesbian mothers or gay fathers. The kids raised by a gay parent did worse on 77 out of 80 evaluating measures. For instance, they are much more likely to have received welfare. Kids raised by their biological family, mom and dad, married, are 17% of them are on welfare or have received welfare. Lesbian mothers, their children, 69% of them receive welfare. Gay
Have you ever considered that the reason that they receive welfare is because they happen to find themselves in a situation where many of them get fired simply for being who they are? And when you find yourself in a situation where you're fired because of who you are, it gets really hard to actually have a job. Funny that. This is the same issue we find when we have people who are chronically disabled and can't find work for those exact same reasons. Also, to just bring up the point, if we're going to talk about Mark Regnerus, then we might as well talk about Mark Regnerus. So let's go ahead and make this to where it's a little easier to see. This is from the Southern Poverty Law Center. He says that this is the most recent study with some of the best and most accurate results. So let's talk about that. To quote, "It's been a busy couple of days for University of Texas Austin sociology professor Mark Regnerus, whose methodologically flawed and thoroughly discredited study with suspect ties has provided ammunition for anti-LGBTQ groups and policy since its 2012 publication in the United States and around the world. The study even appeared in flyers used by a Polish group with neo-Nazi ties. Yesterday, he testified for 3 hours as an expert witness for the state of Michigan on the court proceedings of a lesbian couple who filed suit against the state law that prevents them from adopting each other's children. They've also taken on the state's ban of marriage equality, which was approved by voters as a constitutional amendment in 2004. The Human Rights Campaign linked to tweets by Teresa Baldus, a staff writer for the Detroit Free Press, who noted that Regnerus admitted that he is not a fan of same-sex marriage. Oh, neat, bias. And that an adoption and foster parenting are not the ideal, and that he is not a fan of in vitro fertilization because in his view it reduces kinship. Bullshit, by the way. Baldus also tweeted that Regnerus denied creating the study to derail same-sex marriage, but said that a group that funded it wanted to use it before the Supreme Court. Regnerus, who previously admitted that his research has flaws, will be cross-examined today. Meanwhile, Regnerus' own department chair at the University of Texas Austin released a statement yesterday, as the New Civil Rights Movement noted, distancing the department from him and his research, stating that Dr. Regnerus' opinions are his own. They do not reflect the views of the Sociology Department of the University of Texas of Austin, nor, the statement goes on to say, do Regnerus' research and views reflect the views of the American Sociological Association, which takes the position that the conclusions he draws from his study of gay parenting are fundamentally flawed on conceptual and methodological grounds, and that findings from Dr. Regnerus' work have been cited inappropriately in efforts to diminish the civil rights and legitimacy of LGBTQ partners and their families. I don't know if I really need to go on, but I might as well finish. The statement further noted that the department has no ties to the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture, Regnerus's latest affiliation, he's a senior fellow, which is a conservative think tank of a few blocks away from his campus office. The Austin Chronicle's Brandon Watson has been covering the issue, see here and here, not linking those right now, which is being hailed in some circles as a Witherspoon Institute South. A reference to the New Jersey-based Witherspoon Institute, which provided nearly $700,000 in funding to Regnerus for his discredited study. Sorry, it was not that he received a $700,000 fine, it's that he was given almost $1 million as funding for this study. That's called incentive. The University of Texas Austin's College of Liberal Arts released its own brief statement about Regnerus, saying that his views are his own and do not reflect the views of the university. When he's not being called upon for anti-LGBT testimony in court, Regnerus is researching topics like masturbation patterns in young adults, hint, masturbation is bad, and addressing audiences such as the Franciscan University of Steubenville, I'm probably horribly pronouncing that, where he claimed in November that same-sex marriage and the normalization of gay men's sexual behavior will cause straight men to stray and more heterosexuals to have anal sex. So, the fact that he's citing Regnerus' study has so many problems for me, especially considering that Winger posted this presentation February 24th, 2016. And this article that I'm reading right now is as of March 4th, 2014. So the fact that his study had been discredited was available 2 years before this presentation was made public. So I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt and say that Winger simply didn't know that the study had been discredited. I'm giving that. I'm hoping I'm right.
Gay fathers, 57% of them receive welfare. So they just took specific points, added them all together to say, can we say this is wrong? Some of the other points were they had lower educational attainment. These kids report less safety and security in their family of origin. They report more ongoing negative impact from their family of origin. So they're adults now reporting on having been raised. Ongoing negative impact. They're more likely to suffer from depression. They've been arrested more often. Males and females raised by homosexual parenting have more opposite sex sexual partners than those raised by married biological parents. From a Christian perspective, this makes sense because sexual immorality is in the home, so it becomes normalized, so it becomes something they do when they get older.
Okay. Normalizing what you're calling sexual immorality. If you're trying to make a secular case against homosexuality, then calling it sexual immorality is probably not going to win you any points.
But this study doesn't try to explain why it happens. It's just noting that it does. It found that children of homosexual fathers are nearly 3 times as likely, and children of lesbian mothers are nearly 4 times as likely to identify as something other than entirely heterosexual. Children of lesbian mothers are 75% more likely, and children of homosexual fathers are 3 times more likely to be currently in a same-sex romantic relationship. But the differences in homosexual conduct are even greater. The daughters of lesbians have 4 times as many female sexual partners than the daughters of married biological parents.
Again, so what? The only person calling that immoral is you, and the only person who cares about should be you. Nobody else should give a shit about it. But your argument seems to be that other people should.
And the daughters of the homosexual fathers have 6 times as many. Meanwhile, the sons of both lesbian mothers and homosexual fathers have 7 times as many same-sex sexual partners as sons of married biological parents.
Also, I'd like to point out, this might be a bit of a straw man. I'm hoping that I am straw manning here. Well, it wouldn't be intentional then, but point being, if one of the points for homosexual relationships that you try to grant is that they don't beget offspring, and that's one of the problems with them. You want to use that as a secular argument. But then you cite a study about homosexual parents and their offspring. It seems really strange to me that this would be a situation where you would, again, undermine your previous position.
The most shocking and troubling outcomes, however, are those related to sexual abuse. Now, I want to be careful, and I ask you to listen carefully as I read this to you. Children raised by lesbian mothers were 10 times more likely to have been, according to them, touched sexually by a parent or other adult caregiver.
And did that happen to be because the parents were lesbian? Or again, do we have another problem where there's a 3-point causal link chain? And the causal link is the problem, not the root cause.
Now, it may have been the parent, or it may have been somebody else, another adult caregiver. We don't know. But they were 10 times more likely. 23% of them reported having been touched sexually as a child by a parent or adult caregiver, versus only 2% of the children of married biological parents. That's a radical difference. While those raised by a homosexual father were 3 times more likely, or a reported 6% chance that they were touched in that way.
Now, we would expect, homosexuality being a pretty equal thing in these cases, we would expect those numbers to be closer, but they're not, which means that there's probably not the same type of causal link that you're thinking there is.
In his text, but not in his charts, Regnerus breaks out these figures for only female victims, and the ratios remain similar. I'm just going to continue reading this to you for the sake of the posterity of it, but here we go. As to the question of whether you have ever been physically forced to have sex against your will, not necessarily in childhood, not necessarily not in childhood, affirmative answers came from 8% of children of married biological parents and 31% of children of lesbian mothers, nearly 4 times as many, and 25% of the children of homosexual fathers, 3 times as many. Again, when Regnerus breaks these figures out for females who are more likely to be victims of sexual abuse in general, such abuse was reported by 14% of the married biological families, but 3 times as many, or 46% of the lesbian mother's children and 52% of the gay father's children. So these statistics are, they're well researched, it was carefully done, and there's amazing amount of hate coming out of certain groups against not only Regnerus, but anybody who quotes his stuff, and I guess I'll be next. But can I say this? To endorse same-sex marriage is to endorse same-sex parenting. That makes sense, right? Unless you're going to say they can get married but they can't have kids. This is why Catholic Charities Adoption Agency was forced to close their doors in 2006 after in Massachusetts they voted in same-sex marriage. They were forced to close their doors because the state said you can't refuse same-sex parents. You have to give kids to them too, and they said we're just going to stop. Later that year in San Francisco, another branch stopped their adoption services for the same reason.
Yeah, and that same reason would be levels of bigotry. If you happen to be an organization that can adopt children out, why would you not adopt children to a loving couple who can prove that they are, able to adopt? What difference is there between a heterosexual couple raising a child to a homosexual couple raising a child? The only difference that you'd be able to find is one that's arbitrary. And Sebas McKenzie says that LGBTQ people have an incredibly difficult experience adopting, so there's much more abuse in heterosexual couples than LGBTQ parents. That's fair.
In 2010, the Washington Catholic Charities closed their foster adoption services. In 2011, Catholic Charities of Illinois closed down. Their lawyer famously stated, "In the name of tolerance, we are not being tolerated." They were going to be forced to put children in same-sex homes, and they said that's against our beliefs and our religion, our moral values, and so they were shut down. So, in other words, for the sake of children, we need to not endorse this behavior.
And there's the appeal to emotion. Okay, so you want to have a secular argument against this, but you're going to use rhetoric like, for the sake of children, we need to not endorse homosexual behavior. Mike, you're wondering why it seemed like I came into that discussion with an axe to grind. And yet here we are in a situation where you have used verbiage that is inflammatory, you've used studies that are flawed, you've used correlation, causation, links, which are disingenuous. I'm sorry. No. There's a reason that I called you a homophobe on Twitter. This is that reason.
There's actually a growing number of children as adults now that this has been happening for long enough that some of them are adults, coming out and openly saying, and even starting organizations against allowing same-sex people to adopt.
Would you like to name one of those organizations so that we can look into them?
That says a lot. So lastly, it redefines marriage in a devaluing and unjustified way. We don't have a good reason to change the view of morality and the view of society and go against the scripture and go against what's healthy.
Go against the script. This is a secular argument. You're trying to have a secular argument for this. Society is not based on your scripture. There is no going against the scripture in a secular society because the secular society is not based on your scripture. There are individuals within that society that will follow the scriptures, and that's fine. They can do that. There's nothing wrong with them doing that as long as they are hurting nobody else. But the society is not based on those scriptures. And to argue that they are undermines your entire supposed secular case against homosexuality. Stop.
Healthy for society and healthy for the individuals and all of the above, for every reason, it seems to be wrong. It seems to be wrong.
Okay. It was called Speaking the Truth in Love. No, that was not speaking the truth in love. There wasn't love in there. That was an agenda that was using flawed data in an effort to pull a result. If you want an example of somebody using this to a worse extreme, Steven Anderson has done this to a much worse extreme. Using the exact same studies from the CDC. Sorry. No. This is not a secular argument against homosexuality. This is an attempt at it, but unfortunately you can't get away from those biblical values there. And if you want to espouse those values for yourself and for your own Christian community, awesome. That's fine. You do not need, and I would hope that you would stop telling other people that they should do the same. I am not a Christian. I do not need to live my life by your book. In fact, if you tell me to live my life by your book, fuck your book. And I'm not going to tell you not to live by your book. Because it's your book, not mine. So stop trying to use fallacious arguments so that other people live by the standards of your book. It's wrong. And I do not appreciate it. But what do you guys think? I want to go ahead. So does the Bible state not to spread it? Well, the Bible does say, at least as far as Christianity is concerned, to spread the word. But honestly, having a commandment that that everybody has to think like you and agree with your God causes some problems. Also, so that was pure obfuscation by this individual in a vain attempt to hide bigotry. I don't know if he's intentionally being a bigot, but that is the end result here. Homophobia is unfortunately the end result here. Lou Smith says that was horrible. Original Spaz. Suris, I think he has a soft spot for lesbians based on the wording he used. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. He did make points for child abuse that were 7 times more likely for lesbians than it was for heterosexual or for males. So I don't know if that's necessarily the case. No good comes out of apologism. Well, the thing about apologists is that, or apologetics in general, apologetics are used to defend the faith from within the faith. They're not used as a method of converting people outside of the faith in. But when you're talking about something like this isn't necessarily apologetics, because this isn't defending something. This is actively going after something using arguments that are supposedly from within a different set of community. So Original Spaz, he kept on separating homosexuals and lesbians as if they were different things. That's fair. That might be a point in the verbiage area. Devil says apologists are trying to convince themselves. Not in all cases, but in some cases, yes. Like I said, it is a method of defending internally. So there is certainly a level of just internal issue there. Homosexual lesbians aren't a thing, apparently, from him. Geo Sam says, I think this guy is horrible, and preaching this stuff is even worse. Fair. I don't necessarily think that Mike Winger himself is horrible, but I do think that preaching stuff like this is inevitably harmful. Adi says, Suris, an interesting question. What would be sufficient secular reason to outlaw homosexual marriage? I can't think of one. The only reason that I could think would be to outlaw all marriage, and then as an umbrella, that would encompass homosexual marriage as well. But I can't think of a sufficient one. The only argument that I could think that might hold a little water is if you were trying to save marriage as an incentivization for population increase, for increasing birth rates, and then not allowing homosexual marriages because obviously birth rates don't come from them without bringing in somebody else from the relationship as well. So if you want to provide tax cuts to people who are able to bring children, that might be an argument, but I don't think that argument holds water either, because that's basically saying that heterosexuals should now be given tax cuts for the mere benefit of being heterosexuals. I don't think that holds water. Zero says, do you have a link to why that study's been discredited? I couldn't find anything on the methodology on my own the other night. So I do have... Friendly Atheist actually had a thing about this, and I'll link that here if you would like. Give me just a second. These are the ones that I found just while I was doing this here. And then this one is from the Washington Post. Let's see here. It was a critique by Simon Chang, published in the same journal. Trying to see. I haven't seen what the conclusions for this one were. There we go. And there's another one as well from the Washington Post that might be able to shed some light on that as well. And then the Regnerus study that I linked is right here. This is the one that I looked at from the Southern Poverty Law Center. So those are the three that I've used so far in figuring out why the Regnerus study is not a viable one. Some people want the right all the time without thinking. Awesome. Okay. Special Case says, so he used so many statistics, but he conveniently left out statistics that suggest that LGBTQ children are more likely to be abused by their cis straight parents. Yeah, that's fair. Because this was not an argument. This was not supposed to be a a holistic argument. This was meant to be specifically against homosexual couples. He did not intend on including those, and I'm not going to knock him for being dishonest about that, because I do understand that this was a focused argument. But I would like to see his comments on that there. Eddie says, anyone found a study on the sexual abuse? The link on the notes is broken. Ooh, that's not good. Supposing you're wrong, if followed fully, can lead to great arguments from the people trying to make cruddy arguments. Cephas says the numerical difference, can't remember off the top of my head, was drastic enough that disregarding the population differences makes it seem like the abuse in LGBTQ homes are worse. Geosam says, does Winger see the harm he is causing? I doubt it. I don't think he sees it as harm. I think he sees it as helping. Because he says many times, and he's said as such when I spoke with him, that he's doing this from a place of love, or at least he thinks he's doing this from a place of love. I think that even though it's coming from that place, again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I don't believe in hell, but if I'm going to make an internal critique, here we are. But I do think he should be shown some of the harm that comes from this. Because a lot of the issues that he cited come from what a society does in regards to issues like this. And by spouting rhetoric like that, you inevitably enable people in these societies to act like this. Eddie says the broken link was from an article to FRC Family Research Council. I suspect there's a study cited there, but I couldn't find it yet. If you find that study, link it in the comments after this. That way anybody who wants has access to it. The links that I provided, anybody will have access to through the live chat here, so they'll be able to. Also, I had this set to top chat, not live chat. So if I missed anybody, I am terribly sorry. But with that said, that is the end of Mike's video, and we are hitting an hour and a half, so that's going to be the end of me as well here. If anybody wants to chat for a few minutes, I do have a lot of other work I have to get to today. But if anybody wants to chat for a few minutes about what we went over here, I will be in Discord for probably about 10 or 15 minutes. Links to my Discord are in the description, so you guys can check that out there if you want. Also, the link to Mike's original video is here as well if you'd like to check out that in full without my commentary over it, so that if there's something that I misrepresented, you can see his video and see if that's the case. Hopefully, I addressed this with as much charity as possible. I'm hoping I was generous enough, because I'm hoping that I'm not coming across somebody with an axe to grind here. But that said, hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. I am going to be hopping over to Discord for a little bit to chat with people there, and I hope you guys enjoy. See ya.